President Anderson and members of the faculty, graduates, your parents, friends, and loved ones. I'm deeply moved by this citation, grateful for the opportunity to be here to speak with you, and trust that the 20 minutes that I shall occupy will seem an appropriate last 20-minute seminar before you conclude your work at Augsburg College. Modern man, that is, man in civilization, has no distinguishable nature. He has only history. That thought from Ortega conceals a world of speculation, of discourse, and of disagreement. But quite independently, Waddington and Jordan have said the same thing. Whatever natural man may have been, he is now disguised by successive overlays of history and tradition. If you dig beneath the cakes of custom, you may find the natural man. But in doing so, you may also cripple the modern man, the man you are seeking to analyze, and will make more difficult your task of understanding the present scene. As Waddington might have said it, 5,000 years of accumulated learning and science, 5,000 years of government and engineering, 5,000 years of the arts have made more radical differences in the way man lives than 500,000 years of evolution as evolution is traditionally conceived. And those 5,000 years have had cumulative impact because Western man has assured his capacity to preserve his triumphs and to learn from his mistakes by establishing libraries and universities. The rate of change in man's living was given a jet thrust by the new status afforded inductive reasoning in the Western world. The university that recognizes experimentation and the value of empirical procedures owes a great debt to two great Bacons, Roger and Francis. Because of them, learning has become inquiry, a search that begins from a platform of accumulated wisdom. No longer is it an exercise in memory or in reducing folk wisdom to salty epitomes. Deduction could provide balanced conclusions within a closed universe. Induction broke the outer circle, upset the balance of the past, and often parlayed the process of learning into a process of discovery and into the framework of revolution. Western in origin, the new science had much to do with extending aspirations and stimulating the restless expansiveness of Renaissance Europe. Though not a university man, Columbus reacted as a man of the new science. If it is believed, but doubted, that the world is round, then let's go see. That the new science was encouraged in the new Western universities is important to our discourse. The Western scholar, for his science, inductively posed his questions to the whole world. But for his history, his philosophy, his art, and his tradition, he drew only from the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, Greece, Rome, and above all, Palestine. We in the United States are a late generation of those same universities. And if Ortega is correct, instead of being natural men, we are now a construct of history. And we unfold all of its strength and all of its weakness. The strengths are legion, and we may be justly proud of them. The most glaring weakness is our incompleteness. Before Columbus, there seemed to be only one stream of history, composed from different tributaries, but all flowing into the Mediterranean Renaissance culture. Da Gama, Columbus, the Cabots, Magellan exposed a larger physical world, but we neither saw nor felt any need to establish empathy with the new peoples, nor to believe that Confucius or the Vedas spoke a wisdom relevant to our lives. We acknowledged the property rights of strange races only if they accepted Christianity. We were eager to teach them, never to learn from them, so that our stream of culture was never muddied nor made more clear by a blending of cultural waters. Now there are no dikes high enough to keep the cultural waters apart. Modern man lives in a world physically shrunken, but culturally made much more complex. His nature history needs to comprehend more than Greece and Rome. In defiance of the poet's promise, the East and the West have met. And modern man, if he is to repair the inadequacies of his nature history, must live, think, and act in the whole world. There no longer can be a complete life in the Western world alone, even behind the comforting shelter of Western prejudices that exaggerate our power and endorse our ethical standards. If our nature history is to help us understand the problems of the late 20th century well enough to cope with them, we should know how Confucius, Lao Tse, Mencius, and their counterparts, that is, these counterparts to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, conditioned the natures of the Sino-Japanese societies, how Gautama and Muhammad, as counterparts of Jesus, affected India, Indonesia, and the Middle East. And we must know better than we know now the consequences to life when the cakes of culture are thin and the natural man does show through and the thinner fabric of history cannot conceal him. And the processes of learning all these and 1,000 other things make the prospect of being university and college men in this modern world seem very exciting, and better still, very significant to me. You see, if civilized man has no nature, but has a history instead, and if we now know we have neglected as irrelevant a substantial and important part of the history, our universities and colleges suddenly have the exciting prospect of refashioning our nature history and thus of remaking mankind. The means to any enlarged understanding of the world neither lies in abandoning our convictions about Christianity or about Buddhism, nor in seeking a dead average between Keynes and the economics revealed on the clay tablets of Sumer. It will be promoted by developing intercultural empathy, and for us that requires overcoming an insularity born at least of two things. First, our obsessive attention to the struggle against forest and plains as we tried to occupy the continent and subdue a very stubborn nature. And second, the beguiling influence of the Atlantic and the Pacific moats that made it seem of little importance during our first 100 years to interrupt our westward migration long enough to assess the promises and the threats of international commerce and international conflict. The insularity has made of us a stubbornly monolingual and culturally self-satisfied lot. In no other society could you find so many well-educated people who are at the same time unprepared to communicate without the aid of an interpreter. The specific for curing such a fault is immersion in another culture, and an unavoidable dependence upon a second language for survival, or at least for participation. Learning to know a culture requires more visiting. Intercultural understanding is often negatively affected by tourism. Real knowledge of other people is likely to be won as a byproduct. A part of the folk wisdom I was taught in the home was that you never win happiness by seeking it. You must forget yourself to gain real happiness. The lesson is applicable to our international condition. We don't learn about other people by standing apart and self-consciously observing or asking. We must forget ourselves and our own habits, losing ourselves in the work and thought of the other society, long enough to have experienced some of their pains and felt some of their triumphs. As in language, so with the whole culture. We then may suddenly discover ourselves thinking in a new idiom. At that point, and only then, is understanding born. What do we know about the science, the economics, or the art of development? What part of a nation's productivity depends upon technological improvement in each of the varying stages of rational development? What role can a college or a university play? These are questions that have been asked by Harbison and Myers and are being asked by a growing number of inquirers. And in a curious way, they are the same questions that Adam Smith asked in the year of our independence when he published The Wealth of Nations. They are the same questions that Alexander Hamilton was trying to answer when he wrote his remarkable paper called The Report on Manufacturers. Since Smith and Hamilton represented respectively a developed and an underdeveloped country, what they proposed in the subsequent record fascinates me. Adam Smith's main thesis was that wealth would flow from a division of labor, what we would now discuss under the heading of specialization. His chapter describing the pin factory, his conception of the efficiency of repetition and the diversions that tempt men to idleness as they lay down the tools of one task and search for the tools of another, has a charm that is independent of the validity of the argument. You will recall that one of the great lunges forward in the manufacture of pins resulted from the fact that as man did the same task over and over, he soon achieved a routine ability to manage the task at hand and was free to apply his mind to shortcuts. That's the first research and development program reported in modern industry. The application of the mind to shortcuts in accomplishing the end reaps new rewards in productivity. Now we are more formal in our investment in research and development, not only in industry, but also in agriculture. In fact, in the United States, by the invention of the land-grant college and the explicit investment of our best minds in genetic biochemistry and marketing research, we have made comparative gains in agriculture that are staggering to people who come from other cultures and from other socio-political organizations. Whether we're talking about the automobile industry, the rubber industry, the housing and fixtures, radio and television and electronics, or fertilizers, agricultural engineering, and the development of hybrids, the forces which have transformed the United States from the undeveloped country which Hamilton knew to the developed country in which we live, and which is often the envy of the world, have been the formally trained minds, the minds of people who received education in the colleges and the universities of the country. The improvement is so great that farmers of even 2 generations ago would not believe their eyes as they see our fields. The animals we grow on the farm weigh more, are shaped better, have a combination of lean and fat, all deliberately developed by genetic experimentation. Our clothes are made of synthetic products drawn from farm or from oil that could not be recognized as springing from their natural state. We move more rapidly than birds in the air. By marshaling a few hundred earth movers that are more appalling when seen in operation than any of the behemoths of prehistoric age, we now take the mountain to Muhammad in a way that the ancient poet could never have dreamed. We bring nature and economy to our terms. As we do it, the people in the developing countries watch, marvel, and ask how. They answer their own question more forthrightly than we dare do. While we visit with private benefactors or talk with legislators urging that the best invested dollar is the educationally invested dollar, sometimes receiving friendly response and sometimes being treated as self-pleaders, the Latin American or the Indian watches our economy at work and says at once, "We would like to be as America is. To do so, we must use the instruments America has used." And the secret of Americans' achievement has been universal education. To the man observing from outside, the one clear lesson of America is that America achieved what it has achieved and has developed as it now has developed because it shifted the burden of life from man's back to his mind. As developing countries seek help, they look to the universities of our country and pray that institutions equally effective may be established in their own cities. The college and the university can remake mankind because it keeps him in touch with the best of his history and therefore is in a position to transform his nature. It can also remake the life of mankind because by constant re-examination it can revolutionize the way of doing things so that tomorrow need not be a slavish repetition of yesterday. We ask questions of the past not to know what we must endure tomorrow, but to know how to transform life so that tomorrow will be more pleasant. We ask those questions most effectively in the colleges and the universities of the country. The fact that the questions have been asked and answered so successfully in the United States is explained by the respect we have for the powers of reason and the respect we have had for the institutions we established to cultivate reason. We discovered from our experience that salutary change results from continuous and thoughtful re-examination of life. We employed the processes of analysis and experimentation until we had made the respect for cause and effect a part of our total tradition. We were particularly fortunate because one of our now almost forgotten philosophers, Pastor John Wise of Chabaco, stated the case for reason in a way most likely to make it palatable to the guardians of our tradition. He said, "Man is the most favored of all animals under heaven because that part of God's image, namely reason, is born in him." If others wish to profit from the lessons taught by our experience, they too must award to reason and to the institutions designed to cultivate its power a place of honor within their traditions. Man is not a thing, but an aspiration. He sifts, weighs, and preserves the useful from history so that he can make both nature and the past serve him as he reaches toward the ideals defined by his aspiration. In the West, to assure the cumulative effect of his history, to provide for its orderly transition and its maximum utility, man invented higher education. For you, he provided Augsburg College, which today, with pride, confers upon you its diploma, and which also serves notice upon you that each month hereafter it will bend every effort to make what you have learned obsolete. Augsburg and you will share success and satisfaction in the proportion that you insist that you keep your work and your knowledge current and relevant to the changing need and to the unfolding history of man, who is aspiration. You will continue to need each other, so come back to Oxford often. It is your intellectual home.